Kia ora team.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome along to this Monitoring Ops Committee for September 2021. Before I begin the meeting formally, I just have to read out a statement on live streaming and public recording. Bear with me. Good morning, everyone, and I welcome you along here. I remind councillors that the public section of this meeting has been recorded and live streamed. The webcast will be archived and made publicly available on Council's website within 2 days after each meeting for a period of 3 years. Our purpose is to provide greater access to Council debate, decision-making and encouraging openness and transparency. However, Council accepts no liability for any individual opinions or statements. This is in accordance with Council's live streaming and recording of meetings protocols, which can be viewed on Council's website. I also remind all present that local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council's officers and the public for comments made during the meeting and are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. So thank you, good morning, and I'd like to welcome you to this Operations and Monitoring Committee. Welcome to the members of public who've come on stream to listen to this meeting. Formally open the council meeting, and are there any apologies, please?
Through you, Chair, there are no apologies.
Oh, thank you, Shari. So just for people's information, Shari, our committee secretary, is beaming in from Whakatane, and Amanda is in the background as governance assistant as well. So there's no apologies, there's no public forum. The items, there's no new items to be put on the agenda. The order of business as per the agenda, item 4. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest, please? If not,
yes,
I'll move.
Kevin?
Yes, Norm, go ahead, Councillor Brunning.
Running here. Yes, I have a application for resource consent currently. Okay,
thanks, Norm. So just councillors, when you want to speak, can you just either raise your hand or put up your yellow hand? Sarah's with me in the room here so that we just can keep an eye on all the logistics. So just put up your yellow hand and we'll come back to you straight away. So the item 7, minutes of the June meeting. Would somebody like to move that the minutes be approved, please?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Stacey. Seconded by Councillor Von Danielson. Are there any matters arising from those minutes of 8th of June? If not, I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Or raise your hand. I think that's the best way to do it. That looks like a good series of hands. Those against, motion is carried. Presentations. Right, our first presentation this morning, item 8, is by Kelly Hughes. This was presented to the Rangataiki River Forum some time ago, and I thought it was really pertinent to our work in terms of fish passage barrier remediation work, especially in the bay. It's part of our core business. So, Amanda, is Kelly available? Is he online? Can he beam in now, please?
Kelly is available. Kelly, do you want to turn your video and audio on, please?
Can't hear you, Kelly. Can't hear you, Kelly.
How's that?
Yeah, that's better. Good morning, Kelly, and welcome along to Monitoring and Operations Committee. Some of us have seen this presentation you did to the Rangataiki River Forum 6 weeks ago, Kelly, but I thought it was pertinent that the rest of the councillors and councils see your presentation. So over to you. The floor is yours, Kelly.
Thank you, and ka pai morena koutou. I am appreciative of this opportunity to represent this presentation on fish passage work within the Bay of Plenty, and using it as a little bit of a slingshot to expand into the Greater Bay and not just the Rangataiki, which the original presentation covered. So I'm now going to try and share screen, so bear with if there's any issues there when we get going. And I want to share this one, and somebody could please indicate that you are able to see this.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep, perfect.
All right. Okay. Just bear with. I'll just move some stuff so we can get it here. And right, let's get rid of that. Okay. So the presentation that I showed a few months back was this one that really highlights work that has been done primarily in the Rangataiki, but really was an output of 3 or 4 or more years work of surveys around the bay, and through the Rangataiki River Forum funding was found, and we launched into some of the real hard mahi with that funding. So is that going to work? Right, just leaping into it, and please, I can cope with questions along the way, or we can wait till the end. So we, using the Rangataiki as a microcosm, what we did was a desktop survey to try and get our heads around what's out there, followed by a field assessment, collecting the necessary attributes that might point towards a structure being a barrier to fish. Then we sorted the data, planned the remediation, and will, going forward, look at doing the monitoring as is a requirement. And there gives you an idea of what seems to be fashionable, and that is dots on maps with metadata. So this is really just showing the bulk of the Rangataiki. It actually extends further up to Lochinvar Station. And each of these dots is a different colour based on the current status of that site, being whether it's not a barrier or a barrier that's been fixed or requires further investigation. That's a whole lecture on its own. This is just zooming in over here on the Galatea part of it. So you can see we're talking about a lot of dots, and how do we regionally manage such a large amount of data and a large amount of barriers to fish, frankly, across the landscape is something that we've been challenged with. Pulling back here is the Bay of Plenty, the white dots, of which there are, believe it or not, in the vicinity of 12,000, were generated as a desktop exercise by a summer student, Danny Cairns. And the coloured ones are ones that we've actually visited and done assessment, and in a few cases have done the remediation, which is why you will see that the Rangataiki has got a few more coloured ones going on. We do have data for Whakatane public roads ready to go when funding is found, along with the Kaituna public roads, and to a large degree, some of the public roads within the Tauranga Harbour. Moving right along, this is just where the GIS team overlaid some of the locations of identified barriers with the river network, just to show the disconnection.
Kelly, could I butt in here with a question, please?
Yep. Certainly.
Phil Clark here. Just you made a mention about finding funding to put fish barriers under public roads and state highways. Wouldn't not that be something that the owner has to take care of? Why should we need to be funding that?
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I have the slides that I've added do actually lean back towards that very question. So if you can bear with, we'll touch on that as we get towards the end, but that is a very valid, pertinent question that we are going to address regionally.
Councillors, can I just butt in there? Can we leave our questions till the end of Kelly's presentation, please? And I'll come back to you at the end. Thank you.
Okay, righty. Moving right along. This is just a breakdown of some of the data, which we don't need to get bogged down with. The take-home message is about every barrier that's out, every structure in a waterway. We're looking at pretty close to 50% of them being barriers to fish, either by being overhanging or having a velocity barrier through the structure if it's a culvert, and in many cases, both. So here's a typical before and after. The one on the left here shows a slightly perched culvert and a velocity barrier. because it's fast laminar flow. And here's the treatment where we've put on a floating ramp and some baffles right through. So we're trying to create a complex flow with rest pools and depth and a means for fish getting up. And these have been well tried and tested around the country, but were primarily developed here in the Bay of Plenty. Just another example of one where we didn't use the floating ramp because they're quite expensive. So and if there's no swimming species as such, and we're looking more at banded cockapoo, eel and the like, then we can get away with a soft ramp with muscle rope, yet we still put the baffles through to create the rest pools and depth. So where to from here? Well, we want to continue to remediate all those structures that we've identified as barriers in the rangataiki. We want to gain access to survey structures that have not yet been assessed in farmlands and forests. We want to look at what the monitoring cycles are going to be. How often do we revisit these sites to check that any fixes we've done are okay, and have structures become a barrier since they were last assessed. We need to work with the council's departments, including consents and compliance, and I'd throw in there rivers and drainage and land management. We obviously want to expand the program right across the Bay of Plenty, and we've taken a great step there by that desktop exercise, identifying the likely number of barriers that are out there in front of us. And something that the world in New Zealand and the Bay of Plenty is no different really, is we've got to look at training personnel to build our capacity for doing the assessment, the remediation and ongoing monitoring. To give you an idea, this is some Bay of Plenty people suffering the snow of Southland, where we were able to take people from the conservation cadet course and send them down to Southland to help them with their fish passage. And starting next week, probably some more of the remediation. There's a 5-year program down there funded through the FIF. Other work that we've been doing in the space that some people might appreciate is computer fluid dynamics. So we're here in the Bay of Plenty, we're pretty much world leaders in the space, where we're able to show you, saw the baffles that I showed you earlier. Well, our human eye can't see what's going on in the water at the scale that the fish operate at. So we've been commissioning some computational fluid dynamics, CFD. It's a flash word for basically running some, crunching some numbers so we can graphically display what is happening below the surface. And these are just different visual representations of that, blue being slow water and red being fast, and green being somewhere in between. And we can start to play with different configurations and stuff. And the reason I'm showing you this really is because the Bay of Plenty is leading the world in the space. And so I think we are delivering the requirements of addressing fish passage and the like. Some other work that's happening that you may be aware of is eDNA as a way of seeing who's in and around our waterways. This is a relatively new science, and we're still getting a hang of it and understanding how useful it is. It's got a lot of promise, but we're not there yet in terms of finding the balance between cost and having confidence in the data. I've thrown this up, don't get bogged down with the detail, but it's just to remind me, and it relates a little to Councillor Clark's question. Pim Demonchi and I for some time have been contemplating a role that's required within the council as a fish care coordinator. And that is bringing together a whole bunch of stuff across the departments of the regional council and across other organisations like DOC, Fish and Game, engagement with iwi, and absolutely looking at the fact that there are these small pools of money that could be better used if they were coordinated. And yes, talking to the RTAs, the road transport authorities, about their obligations and contributions to fixing their structures, which the regional council has historically done the assessment for free and the fix for free. And I think we're getting close to the time where that might need to change. And I think that would be easier to negotiate if we had a person dedicated or part FTE in that role of knowing what's going on where and being able to speak directly with consultants and engineers in that space about doing the right thing on public roads. And because we are primarily talking about culverts and the likes. Right, and the last thing I wanted to show you was a little presentation that's just been put together based on a nice little bit of work that was done on the Pongakawa Wetland, which some of you may be familiar with, just showing how easy things can be. Now, theoretically, I press Control and on that hyperlink, and then I might have to, bear with me, I will stop sharing for a moment and go to share screen because it's on a different screen because it's an HTML. Share screen, and it should ask me which one. Where are we? 1 second. No, should be this one here, that one there. Cool. And share. I'll just whiz back to the beginning. I'll talk you through this. Right. Some of you may be familiar with the Pongakawa Wetland, just down below the Pongakawa School. It was very small catchment, spring fed, and it's basically, I think it's funded and sort of looked after by the Western Bay District Council. It's not a regional council project, but that's the point. You know, the regional council aren't the only people in the space doing things. So a little project here. For those that don't know, there roughly is the Pongakawa Wetland. It's a man-made wetland. This is an older photo. I couldn't get an aerial up to date, but basically there are 3 culverts ultimately connecting to the Pongakawa stream, which is has a clean run to the ocean. So there's no reason why fish can't get up to this point. It was getting into the ponds that was the challenge. There were 200 mil PVC pipes. There you go. So this is typical of New Zealand, frankly. So we're not talking big culverts in many cases. A lot of farm culverts look exactly like this. Duck ponds and the likes will have an overflow that resembles this. So it was a great opportunity to work with the Western Bay District Council to remove a barrier, whereas 99% of what we do is remediating it because nobody wants you to actually take it out. So, yep, the plants were well established, having been in about 4 or 5 years. Here's where the big pond meets the lower pond. The culvert starts just by this post and runs underneath and comes out into the lower pond. We had a load of riprap delivered. Unfortunately, it couldn't get right to where we needed it. So we had to transfer it on the 4x4 closer to the pond. A key take-home message is that we didn't want to get into the situation where we're doing in-stream work or causing any sediment or erosion. So we very carefully dug out beside the culvert pipe. We held back the water while we did that, and whipped out the pipe and lined the channel with rock, making sure that there was continuous surface flow and nothing too challenging for the weaker swimmers. Then it was planted, which is a step that a lot of people are forgetting, and this is true of the regional council. Conditions of consent, all water work, erosion control and the likes should be planted up because the shade and refugia and indeed the vegetation in the water does assist with fish passage. Here we use Carrick sector from some floating nurseries, which is a whole nother project over in the in Makatu. And native fish can all get up there now. Here's what it looked like on the day, which was kind of nice to be able to use mature plants. So that's not 6 months later, that's at the end of the same day. And there in underneath is the open channel water course to allow these kind of guys up and through. So that in a nutshell is the sort of thing that 2 people can achieve with a little excavator in a day. And you can probably think of heaps of examples of where that can occur. So for my part, that's pretty much it. I am open for questions, and let's hope we can continue with the good work that's been done so far.
Thank you, Kelly. That was very inspirational, and thank you for that demonstration in Pongakawa Stream. That's new to me too in terms of bringing that forward, because that wasn't on the Rangitaiki River Forum. So I've got a couple of questions. Councillors, please don't use the chat room because I can't see what it is. So I'm going to go to Councillor Nees and then Councillor Thompson, please. Councillor Nees.
Thank you, Kelly. That's really fascinating. I wonder if you could tell me what's the range of costs per remediation for each of these barriers. You know, obviously some are going to be more expensive than others, and how are they funded?
Great question. And it's quite shocking actually how cheap these remediations are. Thinking back to those ones that were on the rangataiki, which are low level, 2 people turn up in a ute and do them in about half an hour. So we can do up to 10 a day with a bit of traveling. So the actual material cost for those low level fixes that we call them, we've actually got the number. It's something like $173, excluding labor and travel type stuff. The wetland, Pongakawa Wetland, is what I'd call a middle range one, where those 3 culverts were done, including all the riprap, and they were worked out at about $2,500 each, because there was quite a lot of mucking around there. And then you get up to things like tide gates and weir removal, some of the big culverts, urban culverts with that might be, like in Nelson, we've fixed culverts that are 1.2 kilometres long, 4 metres wide, and they might cost $30,000. But coming back to the 99% of what we deal with is under $200 for the material element of the fix. And if I can just hold your thought there, historically, a lot of money was spent on prioritising this type of work because there were no low-level fixes, and there was very little money. So council staff and others would spend an exorbitant amount of time and money doing field surveys to prioritise this site over that site. Now that the fixes are so cheap, just get on and do it, like painting a room, starting at one end and working to the other, not the scattergun approach. Okay, which is, you know, what we've learned. This is what the Bay of Plenty is sharing with the rest of New Zealand. Don't waste time and money prioritising. That doesn't mean you don't plan, but you don't prioritise based on ecological values as such. Why? Because we're not going to drive to Galatea past a culvert needs fixing because it scored a little bit less than some other culvert in the distance. If you see what I mean? We take we work up a catchment or east to west or public road, you know, the whole road, regardless of whether this culvert's more of an issue than another culvert. We'll fix the whole lot of them, and then they're done.
Thank you, Kelly. And Councillor Thompson, Clark, and then Councillor Brunning. Councillor Thompson?
No, Mr. Chairman, I have no question. Thank you.
Councillor Clark?
Yeah, Kelly, do you see any scope for engaging volunteer care groups to actually support this activity? Is there a role and a space in there that the council can support?
Yes, and we are doing that over in Karikari with the Uretara Managers Trust. I always forget the name in its entirety, whereby they've got access to funding. It may be amusing for you that I was asked by LMO to go over there and run a little training day so people knew how to do these kind of fixes. And to be honest, by morning smoker, they turned to me and said, can you just do this? Why? Because while it's simple, it is some specialist tools required, a few tricks. You need a bunch of stuff on the ute just to manage the things that you hadn't planned. So care groups are probably best of in that space of gaining permission for access to private property, gaining the funding at that kind of level. There's no huge need, there's no huge benefit, I think, in them being physically involved with the fixes, though we're happy for people to come along with us anytime we do things.
Thank you, Kelly.
So I've got Councillor Brunning and then Nees, and then we'll call it a close. Councillor Brunning?
Thank you, Kelly, and congratulations on your practical approach. Of course, the Hoary Chestnut is the Matahina Dam, and I have got involved in that in 2013, and nothing's happened over the 8 years as far as I know. Where are we at there?
Thank you for that. The Matahina Dam, because I think it's all but covered by an act of parliament and consents and things, it kind of falls through the cracks as far as things like the freshwater fisheries regulation that stipulate that no structure on a waterway shall impede fish passage. So these big hydros are sort of a law unto themselves in some respects. I have been banging on it, the various owners And of course, since Bill Garrison, since we lost Bill Garrison, that squeaky wheel hasn't been so effective. I am allowed to rant a little bit here. I'm wildly unimpressed with what they're doing with that helical type sort of device for capturing the fish. I personally would do it quite differently. I won't get into the detail of that now. I do think it is achievable. I do also think that I think overstating their commitment to doing something. I think, to be honest, Transpower, is this Transpower they're the current owners? Trustpower, yeah. I think that it's a bit of a token effort, and I think we at our council level could perhaps try a bit harder there.
Leave it there, Kelly. And final question from Councillor Nees, please.
Oh, sorry. It was just the second of my questions around funding, whether or not, which bucket is this coming out of? Is it general rates funded out of the land management budgets? Just not sure about how it's funded.
Are you there, Chris? Chris Ingle?
Yes, sorry, councillors. I was just having another conversation. I missed the question from Councillor Nees.
Could you tell us how this work is funded, Chris? From what activity and whether it's general rates funded or targeted rated?
Oh, yes, thank you, Councillor Nees. Where we were trying to assist with fish passage was through MFE grant funding through the Jobs for Nature. Unfortunately, this is one area where we've been pretty unsuccessful with. We've tried twice to get grants from MFE, and as you may have heard from Kelly, I think Pim DeMonchi's been involved. So the funding is through the Coastal Catchments budget, but we only do have, I believe, about $20,000, so it's very minimal. So this is a work in progress. As I said, we were disappointed that MFE didn't come through with the project funding. I guess we're back to the drawing board there with perhaps a bid through the annual plan or something to assist with this work, because it certainly is, from my perspective, it's core business. It's stuff we should be doing as a council and as a community. So very much supportive of the work Kelly does.
Yeah, if I could just add to that briefly, that was part of the point of the Fish Care Coordinator is it a better spend of some of the money within that FTE role to thereby access more money from the asset owners so they do the right thing.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kelly, and thank you for your presentation. That's been very informative to bring councillors up to speed. I understand there's about 35 fish passages have been installed in the Rangataiki catchment so far. That was the number that was given to RRF last week. So we look forward to watching your work closely, because we know it's important to iwi, to everybody really, in terms of allowing these little critters to go up and down their home space. So thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to reports. This is 9.1 on page 16, people. This is the chairperson's report. You've got 3 attachments there on page 30, 32 and 41 in terms of the letter to consent holders for essential information from dairy farmers. You've got a summary of the long-term plan submission points from the Monitoring and Ops Committee, and then you've got the work program for 2021-22. I'll take it as read. Are there any questions? Councillor Rose and Councillor Nees, and then Councillor Thompson. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question in and around the what's it called? It's the new cut at the Makatu Estuary, or the upgrade.
The mole, Kaituna Mole.
Yeah, if we could get a update on that.
Who's that one? Chris, is that you? It looks as though it's work in progress. You saw there's some pictures in the agenda of the sheet pile going in, and Chris, just the quality of the steel, because I know I've asked you this question, so you can answer that one for Stacey, and just an update on the quality of the steel, please, going in.
Yes, it's certainly high quality steel, and the cost reflects that. It's also got a coating on it that prepares it for that environment. A lot of attention's gone into that side of things, ensuring it's an enduring fix, and also has obviously the amenity side of things. So we're improving the environment also for people who use it for fishing and other purposes.
Yeah. Do we have a Chris? Do we have a finish date?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I know it was interrupted by level 4, but I also know that we're back on the job again as of this week. So work has recommenced in that area. So it will have slowed us down by probably 2 weeks, I suspect. But we're back on the job again now.
Okay.
Oh,
Councillor Nees?
We're expecting to be finished before Christmas.
Cool. Councillor Nees, Thompson, and then Brunning. Councillor Nees?
Thank you. I've got 3 questions. The first is was reference to page 20 and water shortage report. Just a bit concerned about the situation in the Western Bay, where there are areas that are theoretically over allocated, and now we have low rainfall, low recharge, and a higher use. And we're seeing that we've got more consents being granted. And in fact, it seemed to me that there were an awful lot of Western Bay consents granted as evidenced by a later report. When do we get to the point of reviewing all the consents in a catchment or refusing a consent application in these areas of water shortage? So that's question 1. Question 2 is on page 26, where we're reviewing the balance consent. I just want to be advised what consultation staff are undertaking with Whenua and the Marae through this process. And lastly, on page 28, we've got a map without a key, and I just wondered what the dots were showing us. Thank you.
Do you want to ask the first one, just on the timelines for the consents for water shortage? Thanks, Jane. Yep. Sarah?
Through you, Chair. Councillor Nees, when we are consenting abstractions, we look at overall sustainability of the aquifer, and those decisions are made based on long-term sustainability. When we've got matters of water shortages, these are points in time where we may need to issue stop abstraction notices to water users. So we have made sure since 2015 that all consents that are issued, it's very clear in the consents that there may be instructions to stop abstracting because of water shortage issues. The water shortage is considered short-term, although, as you know, with climate change impacts, these are things that we're going to have to review, and the sustainability of aquifers we're going to have to review continually. So we are putting those measures in current consents to make sure that when water needs to be stopped being taken, we can.
Second question on balance consents.
And the balance consent, those changes and the review of the consent, which you'll see some really significant reductions in their discharges, which have been fantastic. That's all been based on modelling, and we will be going through the consultation process now that the modelling is complete, and Balance have proposed those reductions. So that will happen now.
And final one on page 28, all the dots.
Yes, apologies for not putting the reference in there. That refers to the areas where we are getting the pollution hotline calls. So you can see the red dots are where we're getting large numbers of calls, and the lighter blue means less numbers of calls, but that's the general distribution just in July of our 0800 pollution hotline.
Yep. Okay, Harry, Jane?
Yeah, just one thing then, what's the red dot at Makatu?
I'd have to get back to you on those complaints. I'm not sure what that specifically relates to, but I'll get that information to you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Thompson, Brunning, and then Chairman Leader. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thank you. Two matters, if I may. The first is actually in the chat room, but I'll read the question out. And the question is, what role is Farm IQ Systems Limited playing with regards all the new regulatory requirements for farms? That's a company that Warren Parker chairs and is trying to introduce a one-stop shop for data collection and other matters across the farming sector, so that we don't have every Tom, Dick and Harry calling at farmers' doors. So that's my first question. And my second question relates to the balance matter. Two subsections of this question. One is, at some stage, can we have a far better understanding, please, of the modelling and how it actually works? And secondly, and probably related to that, how are you distinguishing between on-site and cumulative discharge impacts under that modelling? And I'm happy for those matters to not necessarily be done today, but at another time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. Yeah, we'll have to get back to you on the balance modelling. But Sarah, the IQ?
Through you, Chair, our understanding is that Farm IQ is the tool that brings all of those regulatory matters together for the farmer to make it easier to meet all of those regulatory requirements. And for us, that's just making sure that we feed in our the work that we're doing with industry and making sure that both are connected so that Farm IQ can deliver what it needs to.
You happy with that, Paula?
Yeah, I guess where I'm really coming from with this is that at some stage we're going to have a really good look at how we are interacting or how the various regulatory authorities are interacting with farmers and other property owners, because I think, this is a big customer service issue for us in terms of let's make this as simple as we can possibly make it. So I think that's really in the policy area. Thank you.
And I think that's where Chairman Leader's coming from too, Paula, is that the industry, be it Fonterra, be it beef and lamb, have got to come together, and we've got to work with them so that we're all on the same page and we all attend. We go to a particular farm and these are the lists of things that we have, and we're all not turning up on different days of the week going on about different things. So I think it's a collective responsibility that we've got to work with industry leaders, industry organisations as well. So yeah, we're pushing that boat. So Councillor Brunning, and then Chairman Leader, and then Von Dadelson. Councillor Brunning.
Thank you. Page 31, nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen fertiliser cap. Talk about a letter went out on the 11th of June, I think it was, with a further letter to follow on how landowners were to record the nitrogen use that they have. Can I just encourage that the system is explained to the farmers sooner rather than later? There's nothing worse than getting to the end of a financial year and farmers not remembering which block of land they put that bag of fertiliser on. So if there's going to be a system, can they have it as soon as possible, please?
Thanks, Norm. Yeah. Chairman Leader, and then Von Dadelson. Chairman Leader.
Thanks, Chairman. Similar to Councillor Thompson's request, so I think it's really important that the policy people and the consents people get their head around, because I'm tiring of having this debate about collectivisation of material. And I know it's not just the regional councils, MFE involved in here. Farm IQ, I think, Sarah, is an independent agency, and they were party to that discussion, that long discussion we had with ME about having a portal. I'm not too sure where that discussion went, but as a farmer, I submit all my nitrogen usage as part of my Fonterra compliance program every year. I certainly do not want to have to do it to Farm IQ or to regional council or someone like this. So it's really important that I think the regional sector doesn't reinvent the wheel. There needs to be a discussion in terms of the confidentiality of this information, and those who don't want to comply, then you need to deal with them in terms of the cost should be sheeted home. But where we can use data that has been collected by other agencies and it meets your standard, then let's just get on and do it. I agree with Councillor Thompson. As a user, I only want to collect this data once, and I don't care who I share it with, but that's the message. And if I have to go and read the Riot Act at FIG, which is next week, then we'll go and do it in terms of getting an update. So I'd appreciate some feedback as to where you think that discussion is across the sector.
Thanks, Chairman Leader. Councillor Von Danielson?
Yeah,
and then I think we'll move on.
Page 26, Two Wharetau's geothermal asset application. I note that the recommendation was for a 2-year consent. Yep. I am getting quite concerned that council are tending to go for very short-term consents, and I'm worried about the cost to the applicant from having such short-term consents. Something like re-injection is a high capital cost, and I understand the necessity for it, but I'm not so sure that a 2-year time frame for such a big capital expenditure is actually realistic. So it's a principle of the thing that I think our staff need to think, how can we help our clients, the applicants, rather than how can we hold them up. And so that's just an using this example as an overall concern that I have with the consenting process. So I'm not opposed to shorter consents, but 2 years for a consent and then having to go back again doesn't seem to me to be a pragmatic way of approaching a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Through you, Chair. The decision on time of consent issues is complex and takes, we have to consider all information at hand. For this particular consent, to continue discharging the fluid had been a matter that had been dealt with for many, many years. And this particular application was just to extend the time frame that had already been put in place. And so with all of that information at hand, our officers recommended that an additional 2 years would be appropriate. And I note that the Commissioner, when the Commissioner made that decision, provided 3 years. So that was an acknowledgement of both the difficulty of and cost involved in doing the work, but the need to do it, and the fact that it had been many, many years with timeframes already in place.
Thank you, Sarah. And just one thing from me, 2.6, the Kaituna River rediversion. I thought that's just the report there. It's been going for a couple of years now. It's the 12 gates open and shut accordingly, and the response from data from the science coming back is it's doing what it should, and there's lots of good feedback for us. It was a big capital item for us, and good to see that it's working and we're getting the results in terms of animals, plants, pests, whatever down there, and it's doing what it's supposed to do. So thanks to staff, especially to Pim and the team for, big capital item, but it's doing what it's supposed to do. So thanks for that. Okay, there's a resolution on page 16. Would somebody, I'd like to move. Is there a seconder for that? Thanks, Lyle. Any further discussion? I'll put that resolution on page 16. All those in favour, please say aye. Raise your hand. Thank you. Those against, motion is carried. Right, moving on to 9.2, which is the operational plan for the annual report 2021 and the operational plan for the regional pest management plan. This is on page 42. And I have Greg Corbett online. Good morning, Greg. Good to see you. And can you present, I think you're doing a presentation, and then we'll ask questions later on. And can you hold your questions till the end, please, councillors? Greg, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, councillors. I'll just share my screen now. Hoping that's come through all right. Today's paper is basically presenting our annual report for the Regional Pest Management Plan. You'll all be aware that we adopted our new plan in December last year. So this report is a combination of those two plans, and we're also just providing an updated operational plan for your approval, reflecting the long-term plan budgets and some slight tweaks. Firstly, I'll cover 3 points. First one, I'll just give you a little bit of an update on the appeal to RPMP by Forest and Bird and just where we're at with that at the moment. I'll then just provide a quick little wee highlight of the annual report, and then I'm aware that there's several people have asked for an update on wallabies, so I'll provide a little bit more information about that. So the RPMP appeal by Forest and Bird, you'll be aware that at the council's meeting on the 17th of December, the council appointed a subcommittee of councillors Nees and Clark to support the negotiations with Forest and Bird to attempt to resolve the appeal. The process with Forest and Bird's been very constructive. We've worked through quite a few points, and we've now reached an agreed position with them that we're taking back to the Environment Court, and the Environment Court hearing is scheduled for in a couple of weeks' time this month. What the two parties have agreed to would see Kauri dieback included as an exclusion pest, and a number of plant pests moved from the advisory list into the sustained control program, and that would be supported by a new rule which is solely focused at supporting community and landowner initiatives where they might be doing work on their land against a number of weeds, and that work's being threatened by adjoining properties. So that position's being taken to the Environment Court for the court's consideration. Following the court's decision, it's likely that we will be amending the operational plan, and we'll bring that back to the committee for for the committee to decide on the things like the budget impact and and the amendments to that plan at that time. Just highlighting some of the things from the annual report. I suppose the biggest things for us operationally has been that we now have a new database system, GeoPest, and this is already starting to show some really good tools for improving our management and reporting. And you'll note that if you're looking through the annual report itself, we're now reporting on the actual area that is occupied by pests in the Bay of Plenty. Just given that, I'd just like to note that over the next couple of years, we'll see those areas that we're reporting increase. And this is mainly because we are rebaselining our data sets. So as we're increasingly covering the region with inspections, our knowledge will increase, and we'll see some of those weed areas grow in extent, and that's to be expected. A couple of the other things of note is really our new to region surveillance is really starting to show just the increasing pressures on our region by pests. So we're seeing not just new pests arriving in our region, but naturalisation. So these are things like plants that have been brought into the country as ornamental plants. They are adjusting to the habitat and our climate, and then self-propagating and spreading into into the environment. So this year, we've got 23 new pests that we are actually looking at and managing currently outside the RPMP. And a lot of these sites are just single plants or very small areas. New tools such as eDNA and drone are starting to add value. We heard earlier today about that Kelly's also using eDNA, and he explained some of the limitations with it. But for us, it's still proving to be a useful tool, particularly when we're trying to add confidence to things like our catfish surveillance, where our netting program in lakes where we don't believe catfish are present, we're using eDNA to help support the confidence of decisions of whether catfish are present or not. And generally, the RPMP is tracking well, with 89% of the programs believed to be on track. There's a number of things that are proving a little bit problematic. We've had new finds of alligator weed in the Eastern Bay of Plenty associated with kiwifruit orchards. And as most of you will be aware, trying to use the chemicals that we use for controlling alligator weed in a commercial orchard is quite challenging. There have also been a couple of new finds with Ngora burr, one of another eradication pests, and we're seeing the range expansion of Asian paddle crabs into Ohiwa Harbour. Things like woolly nightshades and wallabies are continuing to be challenging. We'll talk a little bit more about wallabies coming up. And the other good thing, I suppose, is that we've seen the Crown funding come through for wilding conifers and wallabies, and that's really is enabling a significant upscaling of our programs, and that additional funding from the Crown is greatly appreciated. Just looking at some of the stats that we are now able to report, just with a new data system, its ease of use has meant less office time or downtime for our contractors, and we're seeing already a significant increase in the number of inspections coming through, and we're now able to report on the status of those inspections. So we're seeing that while we have the majority of our properties that we are inspecting non-compliant with the RPMP, the good thing that we are able to report is 61% of those that are non-compliant, those landowners are actually working on the problem. So that's really good to see. A number of inquiries we've dealt with is slightly up from last year, and we've with the increase of inspections, there's been also an increase in the number of notices provided to landowners requiring them to carry out control work. Right, moving on to wallabies. Firstly, the extra investment from the Crown has enabled far greater surveillance than what we've been managing to achieve in the past, and that is revealing new populations of wallabies. And again, not surprising. Most of these new finds have been in the Waikato, and some of them have been quite some distance from our core infestations. Kennedy Bay up in the Coromandel being the furthest extent, probably the result of someone taking a pet wallaby up that way and it escaping or being released. And then another find at Opepe on the Napier Taupo Road, again, a long way from where we believe wallabies, the core range of them to be. The control operations that we've been carrying out are returning quite significantly different results, and again, not necessarily surprising. The aerial 1080 work that's been done at Horahora and Te Kopia and Rotoehu have returned really high reduction in wallaby numbers. But our follow-up work at Paehinahina, which is around the Mauria area, which is an area that we've just retreated 2 years after its initial control, using a combination of shooting and cyanide, has returned a much lower level of control. And again, there's probably a number of factors involved there, including just the residual wallabies from the initial operation. Once they've been exposed to things like cyanide and shooting, are getting more wary. So some of the stats from last year, the total spend of just over $1 million, mainly on surveillance, though there were a number of aerial operations carried out. They were funded through DOC and the Waikato Regional Council. One of the good things we are tracking is, because this is a Jobs for Nature funding from the Crown, so 42 people were employed at various times through the year last year, and that number is increasing going as we go forward. Following up with some of our surveillance in these newer populations that are outside the containment area, the systems at the moment are showing that 65 wallabies were shot out of those new satellite populations. If we're just looking at the year coming up, and I apologise about this map with the labels. The labels not really necessarily that relevant, but I just can't turn them off in the system that MPI uses. So they just come through with through the program that we're using here. But this map shows the extent of the surveillance work that we'll be doing over the next 12 months. The majority of that will be using dogs and cameras, but we are also increasingly using drones to support our surveillance work. And then the control work is primarily focused on the just inside the containment area, and looking at where we're seeing the greatest level of spread at the moment, which is through the Waikiki and Atiamuri area into the Waikato. And happy to take questions now, Chair.
Well, thank you, Greg. Couple of questions from me. GeoPest. So did we develop that system?
Yes, it's being developed. We have used the support of an external consultant, but it has been developed by our council.
Yeah, no, very good. Pleasing that people can use IT in the field as opposed to coming home and putting it onto paper or however. So yeah, really good efficiency. And just, you said there was 42 people involved. Is that just Jobs for Nature, or how many people have we got on the ground shooting these or getting rid of these damn things?
Yeah, so that 42 people is a reflection of the number of contractors that have been involved in the Wallaby program during the last year. And say this year we would see an increasing number going forward. We expected that the Wallaby program will support, based on current funding, about 25 full-time FTEs once we're running at full noise.
So that's shooting, poisoning, all range of things.
And and the surveillance work, yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. And
question, Chair?
Sorry, hold on. Just one thing, Greg. I was concerned to read that alligator weed spraying in Te Teko, the police were called in because our staff were threatened. Did they arrive, and has it been resolved? The police were notified of that incident just because there was a threat made to contractors and staff. We've been in contact with the person involved and just working through with them the issues that they're concerned about. So we are looking to continue those operations in this coming season. Okay, thank you for that. Greg, can you get down your screen so I can see everybody again, because I can't see the hands, but I think there's a question from Councillor Clark and then Councillor Eaty. Councillor Clark?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. In the course of the last 12 months, have you perceived there been any shift in the social negativity towards the use of 1080?
For you, Chair, I don't think there's been any shift. We've got, as Council be aware, we've got very polarised views on the use of 1080 in our communities, with relatively small segments being strongly opposed, relatively small segments being highly supportive, and a whole lot of people in the middle that not really concerned one way or another. But those people that are strongly opposed are very vocal, obviously.
Yeah. Councillor Eatey and then Brunning.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Greg. Thanks for that. I've just got a comment and a question. My comments regarding the metrics you put up for Facebook and on one of your slides regarding the public awareness campaign around certain pests like nightshades and so forth. I've just had some caution, I guess, around some of those figures, like reach of 200,000. They can be a bit misleading as to how effective they actually are. So just that was a bit of a fade for me seeing that in the report. And then a question regarding, there's a slide in there where you pointed out that engaging with Māori landowners is a bit slow and complicated. So my question is, what are the main barriers and I guess, challenges that are coming from those landowners? And what is the potential impact on the area surrounding, or the programs that have been running on the land surrounding those lands? Thanks, Greg.
Yeah. For you, Chair. The key things dealing with Māori land have been the use of 1080 and also the quite reasonable expectation that the whānau will be involved in delivering work on their lands. And the challenges around that is just obviously the work that we do can be quite dangerous. Use of firearms, use of toxins, etc. So providing the training and support needed to upskill people enough to deliver those operations safely. It has been difficult to work our way through that. We've got a number of contractors that are prepared to support, local people by involving them in the operations at site. But again, they obviously are taking on the risks of providing that training and that supervision to ensure they comply with health and safety. And so the costs go, in some cases, over twice the cost of delivering those operations just to provide that support. So this is something that we will be working with MPI on. How do we better enable Māori participation in the program? We've got a debrief scheduled for the beginning of October on the last year's work, and this will be one of the topics that we will be working through with MPI. And it's not just an issue for the Wallaby program; it's also an issue for a number of other bits of work that we do as well.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Could I suggest potentially that, because I think this is quite a big issue across the region, tangata whenua certainly want to be involved in the pest management across their lands, and we're talking about vast sections of land, that we look at a report to come to Committee Māori around this particular issue on how we can approach this particular kaupapa.
Yeah, good suggestion, Toy. Thank you for that. Be done. Councillor Brunning and then Councillor Rose.
Yes, through you, Chair, to Greg. Now, Greg, you've got a program of works and you're gaining knowledge as you go on. Do you still have a clear picture, and will it be up to our expectations, say, in 3 and 5 and 10 years' time as to where we will be?
For you, Chair. We've set quite clearly in the LTP goals where we want to be, and we're still working to that. So that is looking to eradicate those satellite populations that we've discovered, and the reduction of the containment area size by 2024. I suppose we still have those, the use of 1080, which will be our main tool in the short term. Obviously, there will be still those ongoing challenges about getting landowner buy-in to use that methodology. And I think that's probably still going to be one of our biggest challenges to achieving that. As we alluded to in the report and in the presentation, those negotiations do take time. and we're looking at how do we, how do we go through that negotiations in a more streamlined way? And we are aware that that some of our initial approaches with iwi have not worked particularly well, and I suppose, you know, summarising it in with Ken Rawati's words, he believes that we've been trying to push things too fast because we've got money to spend now rather than doing proper groundwork. And I think that that's probably a fair summation of some of our negotiations to date, where we've been going straight to landowners and just trying to talk through the issues around 1080 rather than starting at a hapu level, talking about the Wallaby program and working our way back down to the Awhenua trusts.
Cool. Councillor Rose, then we'll call it a day then. Councillor Rose?
I didn't have a question. I don't know why I was called. Yeah, sorry, I didn't have a
wave
question.
your hand. Okay, there's a resolution on page 42 that we received the report and we approved the operational plan for Bay of Plenty Regional Pest Management Plan 2030. Could I have a mover? Norm, seconded by Lyle. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Raise your hand. Thank you. That's a good consensus. Motion is carried. People, it's 10:35. What I'd like to do now is have a 15-minute break, cup of tea. Can I remind you that this live stream continues, so turn your video feeds off and yourself on mute, because the live feed still continues, and we'll meet back here in 15 minutes, 10:50. Okay? Cool.
Mr. Winters, are you there? Kevin? No, I'm not. Okay.
Okay, so we're back in business. Thank you, councillors. We're on page 49 of the agenda, Mount Maunganui Industrial Airshed Update. I have staff, Stephen Miller and Reese Irving. Are you there, Steve? Oh, you're there, Stephen. Welcome along, and the report taken as read, but if there's any highlights you'd like to include for councillors, there's 4 attachments, the PM10 exceedances as at August 21st, a letter to Jo Gascoigne, who's joining the working party on Thursday. She'll be zooming in. The Mount Maunganui Air Quality Working Party key actions on page 61, and then the media comms and media report on page 67. So, Stephen, floor's yours. Welcome along.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Councillors. Good morning to see you all. It's great to see you all. Really, I'm just here to answer any questions with the report. I'll take it as read, as
taken as read.
Yep.
So, a couple of highlights. Stephen, we've got new rules for methyl bromide being introduced by EPA, and the PFAS investigation. This is on page, I can't see it. It's 51. So we've still got those 2 sites. Nothing else has been found, Stephen, for the PFAS, and it's in the stormwater drainage draining off the runway. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've done no further testing, councillors. We're at the stage now where we're planning phase 2, which just takes the project a little bit wider than that initial stage, which was around the kind of the Marai sort of space that we've got south of the balance site.
Yep. I've got questions from Councillor Von Danielson and then Leader. Andrew, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question of clarification. You might not be able to answer it now, but I would like to get a report on methyl bromide use throughout the country. In other words, what percentage of logs at other ports are used? What is their method of fumigation? And are we an outlier, or are we the norm? Whatever, as we stand today. Can you help me with that now, or do we need to come back?
Do you want to answer? Yeah, Sarah.
Through you, Chair, we can provide that detail around methyl bromide use through the country at the next monitoring and ops update, if you like. So it'll be a comprehensive report back.
Okay, thank you. It'd be nice to get an interim feel of it, that's all, rather than wait for 3 months.
Chairman Leader, and then Nees, and then Rose. Chairman Leader.
Thanks, Chairman. A little bit of information for you, Andrew. Northland, it's a permitted activity. The other big user or main user is Nelson. So if you take, for example, Gisborne stows logs in hold. Those ships then come to Tauranga and pick up methyl bromide treated logs. So those are the big users here. It's not used in places like Wellington. That I don't know about containers. But anyway, Chairman, thanks very much. Look, I just want to put some context around some of the, especially around the discussions around methyl bromide. And what's in here is some commentary regarding EDN. There are multiple parties who are accountable for actions around here. So for instance, EDN, the application to use EDN was made to the EPA. Now I think I got my figures right. I think 7 years ago last month. It's either 5 or 7 years ago. So the EPA has been sitting on their hands essentially for a long period of time, whilst industry and others have been waiting for this alternative fumigant to get some form of approval. So there's multiple agencies involved in here in continuing with using methyl bromide, and it doesn't sit clearly at the genera door. So I think that's important context.
Thank you, Chairman Leader. Councillor Nees and then Rose.
Oh, thank you. Well, firstly, I just wanted to say it's excellent to see that the industry are getting together and developing a planting and screening program in the Mount Industrial area. It's really great to see, and obviously very pleased to see that the EPA has finally made a decision to put in place more stringent requirements for methyl bromide. I guess my question is, to what extent are we going to be checking that Port of Tauranga and its contractors can and will comply with the new requirements, and to perhaps suggest it would be really good to get a briefing on this, please?
Stephen?
Yep, that's a great question, Councillor Nees. We never really take the foot off the gas when it comes to the monitoring that we do at the port and fumigation. When the new rules come in, we'll be first knocking on the door on site, doing our compliance inspections, as you'd all expect. We'll have a plan. We've got a little time to plan as things kind of drip feed in over the next few years. But with the expertise we've got in David Eade, who presented to you all a couple of meetings ago, and with Sam supporting on the technical side, I think we're well resourced and prepared for the new rules as they come in.
Thank you, Stephen. Questions from Councillor Rose and then Thompson. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question in regards to the Mount Maunganui Air Quality Working Party. What is the status with the Ministry for the Environment? So they've obviously, as it says in 2.2, they've expressed that it's important for them to attend. Have they attended any of the other working party meetings currently? And then my second question is in regards to methyl bromide. Have staff been in contact with genera and the port in regards to the new rules, and having an open dialogue about the future for methyl bromide at the port?
So just to answer your first question, no, Ministry of Environment haven't attended working party meetings yet, hence the invitation from Graham Marshall to attend on Thursday, and Joe will be zooming in. I mean, these are their rules and they need to front up and face our community face to face, and so she'll be zooming in on Thursday. Your second question, do you want to, Stephen?
The new rules are relatively new, so at the stage we're at the moment is we are liaising with the environmental manager with Genera, but those conversations have been kind of a bit casual at the moment and not really on official level. So we're going through a phase of adapting, getting used to, and sort of just having general conversations more than sitting around the table and discussing kind of what next.
Yeah, so thank you. Councillor Thompson and then White. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I have two comments. My first comment would be just to acknowledge the work of the community representatives on the working party, and particularly towards the initiative with industry on planting. So let's not lose sight of that community where the representatives were a large part of that. There's a broader picture to Mount quality air issues, and they aren't going away anytime soon. So whilst we can say that there looks to be some really good positive moves, there are much broader issues at play, and this will be an issue that will face the city of Tauranga, and indeed us, as a major risk for some time to come. So sorry to put a little bit of a pull on matters, but that is the reality as I see it, a very significant issue going forward. And I think, Sarah, I couldn't work out the percentages of complaints to the pollution prevention hotline over air matters in Tauranga, but I think it was something up around 90%. But please don't embarrass me by telling me I got that a bit wrong, but they're very high. Thank you.
Did you want to comment? Okay, thank you. So I've got questions from Councillors White, McDonald, Crosby and Thurston. Councillor White.
Yeah, kia ora, Stephen. Thanks for the report. I'm just looking at the pollution hotline and the complaints coming forward on odour. And I noticed in recent correspondence where our council operators took one particular organisation to task, and it went to the courts, and it was the particular defendant won largely because the case could not be proven. And it seemed that even though our operators are on site and their noses are over the particular situation, the evidence they presented could not hold. I'm assuming, can you give us an update on what level of remedies are being put in place to I guess, shore up our sense of odour pollution, and before it goes to the court, that we have a case to be held up, if you like?
Yeah, we were disappointed that we couldn't act on the evidence we had. So we call on our senior officers to sort of step up at this point. So they're here, they've got the most experience, and we've just really sat them down with the less experienced and really gone from the beginning of what we have to do right to the end. So where our evidence just lacked a bit of strength, we've just targeted those areas so that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, thank you.
Sarah?
Through you, Chair, and just to let councillors know that the MFE have a good practice guideline on managing odours, and our staff work to that guideline. Unfortunately, best practice at the moment really does rely on, as you know, noted Councillor White, on people's noses. There's not technology available that we can just walk in with a monitor and say that odour is offensive, and that odour can be sourced from this particular activity. But Stephen's team have been investigating some new and promising technologies with a local company, and they're on call to support the officers when they go down to any odour complaints, and we will see if that technology can support us, which is really going above and beyond what the MFE guidelines provide councils. It's an issue that all councils around New Zealand are struggling with at the moment, and we just need to get in front of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a follow-up comment then. I note that a number of these organisations are going for consents, and I'm assuming that this might be part of that discussion during that course of consenting.
Couldn't possibly comment, Titaru, at this stage, but yeah, we'll leave it at that. They're up for consent, and we'll let staff and the consents team work through knowing their history. Leave it at that.
Yeah.
Councillor McDonald, Crosby, then Thurston. Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. I guess my issue around the Mount Airshed challenges is still around the health issue. I'm still not satisfied that we've made traction in this space, and I take on board the comments of staff in the report that this is not just a local and regional matter, so look forward to the discussion with MFE. If we can't get to where we should be at the local and regional, obviously we have to go to central government, because I still feel that priority is still not been given to this area, given the advice from Toi Te Ora and DHB that they have stated what they want to state in this space, and that is up to councils to act upon the advice that they're given. I still think that's a shortcoming on their part, albeit the matter is still a huge issue for the residents of Whareroa, and also becoming an issue to those espousing on behalf of clean air. So yeah, my issue is still around about the health impacts, and in my view, the lack of analysis and priority given to the impacts on health within the airshed area. Kia ora.
Thank you, Martin Weiner. Yeah, pertinent points. And Councillor Crosby.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in a way, it's leading on from Councillor McDonald's commentary. Stephen, are you comfortable that all the agencies, particularly our council, TCC, health, etc., are working collaboratively now, not in their silos, and linking to the Working Party and iwi and community as a whole? How do you see that travelling at the moment?
I think we're definitely on track, and I think it's building momentum. Every agency has their own priorities, and I can respect that, but I feel as though we're all getting around the table and we're having the conversation and people are turning up, and I definitely think it's heading in a positive direction at this point.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Thurston.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of transparency, I sit as an advisory member on the Bay of Plenty DHB, one of their public health committees. Sarah presented brilliantly to the last meeting of these combined committees at the DHB, so my questions flow out of that. But in terms of Graham Marshall's Mount Airshed Working Party, can the team just clarify for me the roles of the Bay of Plenty DHB, who actually represents them at the meetings? Is it the 3 medical officers of health, or do they attend individually, or all 3 attend? Because I can share with you publicly that at the meeting, the Whareroa issues were of some news to some members of the Bay of Plenty DHB committee. So, no, some of them were. Some of them weren't up to speed with a lot of the critical issues. So I just seek clarification as to who attends from the Bay of Plenty DHB and what role in this do the 3 medical officers of health have. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lyle. Sarah?
Through you, Chair, we actually have 3 health representatives on the Working Party. The first is the Medical Officer of Health for Toitiora, one of the 3. We also have the Chief Executive of the DHB as a member of the Working Party, and thirdly, the Primary Health Office are represented there as well. There have been attendance is often mixed, and you'll appreciate that this week we've got our Working Party on Tuesday, Toitiora, and the DHB are in the middle of the COVID response, and so they've already indicated that they won't be in attendance.
But in answer to Councillor McDonald, just take some comfort. They were challenged to be more proactive in this space, Councillor. So, but thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Lyle. Okay, there's a recommendation on page 49 that we just received the report, moved by Councillor Thurston, seconded by Councillor Von Derelson. I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, raise your right hand. Yep, that's a good spread. Thank you for that. Motion is carried. Moving on to page 83, and this is the Consents Annual Report. Thank you, Stephen, for your report. And zooming in is Reuben Fraser. Good morning, Reuben, and welcome along on page 83.
Good morning, Chairman, and good morning, councillors. I also have one of our new team leaders, Nick Barnes, with me, so just introducing him to you. You may have seen him in his civil defence role, and he's joined the consent team a couple of months ago to replace Hamish Dean, who's left the organisation. And thanks for the opportunity to talk to you about the consent team from last year. With your leave, Mr. Chairman, I just would like to say that it was a very busy year for us last year, but we had lots of really cool, interesting things to do. And I think the report that Nick's put together shows that we had a pretty successful year in terms of timeliness and customer satisfaction in particular, which are the LTP KPIs. And we also had, a real range of really interesting consenting applications and issues to get involved with. So unless there's more detail that you need from me, I'm happy to take the report as read and answer any questions.
Yeah, hello, and welcome, Nick, to the team. And thanks, Ruben. Yeah, the executive summary on page 83, really good to see the improvement in non-notified applications processed in the statutory timeframes. Those are always good things to see from our point of view, and applications processed in the working days required. So, keep up the good work, and with more and more consents coming your way, the workload is not dropping, Ruben.
No, that's certainly true, Mr. Chairman.
So are there any questions? I've got Councillor Nees and then Councillor Crosby. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Well, firstly, congratulations to staff on huge progress that you've made. Two questions. One is there's quite a large number of consents in the Western Bay this time around, and I just wondered if you could give us any indication whether they're water allocation or land use consents or discharge consents. What is that largely made up of? And that's question one. Question two is there was a passing reference to a project to address long-standing consents, and I just wondered how many of these were left, how well we progressed the completion of these.
Thanks, Councillor Nees, and through you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have the exact numbers for those questions in front of me, Councillor Nees, but my expectation for the consent applications in the Western Bay of Plenty would be that those are a lot to do with bores and with water for orchards in that area, but I'll certainly come back to you with some more detail on that. And similarly for the backlog project, I think we've made some really good progress in the ones that we reported to you, might be 3 years ago now. But as we work through, and some applications tend to hang around for a long time if we're waiting for applicants to do things in particular. We don't feel that we have the big pressure from that backlog that we did probably 2 years ago. But again, I'll come back with some more detail on that for you.
Happy with that, Jane? Cool. Councillor Crosby and then Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and morning, Ruben and Nick. And thank you for the report, which looks very positive. In terms of adhering to the timeframes, it's often a relationship to the quality of the application. How are you seeing now the quality of applications moving forward, and requirements for further information? Is that decreasing, or is the general quality of applications actually improving, which is the relationship to these good numbers?
Thanks, Councillor Crosby. That's a really good question. And through you again, Mr. Chairman, I think one of the key indicators of the quality of the applications that's highlighted in the report is the number that we're returning right at the beginning. And you'll see that there was a big peak in 2018 following the 2017 amendment to the RMA, which the direction from MFE at that stage was we should be sending more back if they're not up to scratch. And I think when we send things back for the same reasons to the same consultants, that's one way that we can certainly improve the quality of applications.
Yeah.
The second thing that we can do to improve the quality of applications is to improve our application forms. And we've certainly done a lot of work on those over the last year. So I think overall, the quality of applications has improved significantly, which really does help with that timeliness.
Cool. Yeah, good answer. Thank you, Ruben. Councillor McDonald.
Kia ora, Ruben. Thanks for the report. Ruben, you report in here that your consents team have been having meetings on marae throughout the region. Can you tell me, from responses from your staff attending those, what have been your 3 top learnings from doing that?
Thanks, Councillor McDonald. It's hard to pick three. I think the big advantage for us is getting to know our tangata whenua representatives and to hear from them directly about the challenges and aspirations that they have. So from the marae that we've been to, we've been really lucky, and I think we've had 2 or 3 representatives come and speak to us about the work that they're doing, some of the challenges that they're seeing, and some of the ideas that they have for us to work better together and improvements for our process. And I think just the strength of those relationships and investing time and energy into those relationships has been the biggest benefit for me.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions, no. Reuben, question from me, page 88, customer service, and you talked about the 84% satisfaction score, but only 16% of the applicants returned a survey result. Not a high proportion of people. Why are people not responding? Is it too hard? Is it too time consuming? When people ask me to do a satisfaction survey for whatever, if it's more than 2 minutes long, I say, oh no, it's too hard, I haven't got time. So in terms of our surveys, why are people not responding?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a specific answer to that about why people aren't. I can say that for the people who do respond, it takes them about 5 minutes to do this survey. Yeah. You will have seen, I think, the sort of email that you get from some organisations now, when you can just click on a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10.
Yeah. Sliding scale.
And they're asked more questions. Yeah, sliding scale. So we're just investigating how we can best do that with Zendesk, which is the CRM system that the council has invested in. I'd also note that when we compare this to the sorts of response rates that other councils around New Zealand get, it's actually quite high. So I think Auckland Council sits at about 2% response rate. So we do think that we get some really useful information out of this survey. And each month I'll go through and look at the comments that people have made about how we can improve our service. And we do get some good suggestions coming through from that stuff. And the website, I think the website was, the website update was included in the chairman's report earlier for you this morning. And that's one of the sorts of things that we do in response to some of the comments that we get through that survey. Okay, yeah, good point. Thank you. And second question from me, page 90 on the fast track consent application for the marina at Whakatane River. Do we have a decision date for that to be consented by under that new system? No, we don't. Is it going to be faster or is it going to be slower? That's a $1 million question, I think, Mr. Chairman. So the latest update on that is that the EPA are looking at that at the moment. We're just in the process of talking to Whakatane District Council and Ngāti about who appropriate commissioners will be for that process. But I don't have any certainty over timeframes, I'm sorry. Okay, all right, I will watch this space because it's, yeah, I won't say any more than that. And okay, are there any other questions from councillors on this report? Te Taru, you've got your hand up. Councillor White.
Yeah, just to emphasise, just pick up on the point that Stuart made around the quality of the consent processes, and also Mati Moana's comments around meetings at Marae. The implications for Māori, as you've indicated, almost all of the applications actually involve tangata whenua, and this is a point of frustration both for tangata whenua and applicants. Just wanted to emphasise that you made a point that this is one of your main focus areas. So I'd really like to see how you unravel that space over the course of time, Reuben. Don't expect you to answer it now. You've obviously been given some thinking to that, but it is a very, very important area to resolve at some point. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, good point, Te Taru. And, as councillors, we've put a lot more money into Māori engagement, iwi engagement in the next 12 months. We've certainly upped the budget, so we hope to see that flow through into the consents planning team as well, right across the council. So yes, good point. Okay, if there's no further questions, I'd like somebody to move the recommendation on page 83, moved by Councillor White, seconded by Councillor Nees. Please raise your right hand if you agree. Thank you for that. That's a good consensus. Motion is carried. Moving on to 9.5, which is the climate change program reporting. Thank you, Nick and Ruben, for that report. And we're tuning into Laverne Mason now. Good morning, Laverne. Welcome along to our meeting. Page 96, councillors, on the climate change program reporting. Laverne, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor. Good morning, councillors. This is the regular 6-monthly report on the climate change program, the activities taking place that are specifically aligned to the action plan that was approved. And I'd like to put forward the report to be taken as read, and I'm happy to answer questions. I've also got Jane Palmer online to help answer any other questions.
Thank you, Laverne. Yes, it's taken as read, and welcome along, Jane, wherever you are. Can't see you. Any comments you want to make, Jane, as well? Because I'm pleased to see that you put in my gross and net emissions. Good couple of diagrams on page 100. Thank you for that. I think it paints a different picture. And I think we should see both of them at the same time. But any questions to either Jane or Laverne? I've got questions from Councillor Nees and then Councillor Thompson. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Thank you for a full report. Couple of things. Could you provide me with a bit of information about what the Bay Trust Nature Carbon Program is? So that's number one. The other one is, I believe it's really important that we get reports on how we are working with other territorial local authorities on climate change. And I was asking if we could potentially have a section in the report on this as we go forward. An example of that is Tauranga City Council has completed their sustainability framework, which is recommending some major work in this space, including the development of a strategy and a carbon reduction action plan, or climate change action plan. And I think we need to be working really closely with them to make sure that we don't get out of step with them and perhaps have conflicts in different objectives, for example, as we have with public transport. So that's number two. And also a question around engagement with the general public about what they can do to make a difference in the climate change space, and a question around whether we are doing anything with the It's Time website that ECAN offered for use by regional councils as a tool that is unbranded that we could use to actually push more information out to the public. Thank you.
Yeah, good line of questions there, Jane. Thank you. Laverne or Jane, who's going to answer those?
Yes, Jane, would you like to answer the first question, and we can move on from there?
The Bay Trust?
Correct. So the Bay Trust project was came through, well, BOPRC have had conversations with Bay Trust previously, but it was also a project that came through the LTP submissions. But essentially it's about a local carbon offsetting scheme where there'll be trees planted locally that local businesses could then purchase those offsets to offset their carbon emissions. And that's a scheme that Bay Trust is working to set up with ECOS, which is a well-established carbon accounting company. So we're providing support as agreed through the LTP to help set up that project.
Thank you, Jane. Councillor Nees, in terms of the local authorities question, we're doing a big initiative, and it's probably our biggest piece of work in terms of conducting a risk assessment for the region in the adaptation space. The TAs are very involved in this. They are part of the working groups, and they have been part of the pilot study that we've just completed. The next steps around this are to actually appoint consultants and to get a regional risk assessment that will again include all the TAs and taking into account what work they've done, so that we actually do form a regional perspective on the climate change approach for us.
With respect, I know about that risk assessment work, and there's a lot of work being done nationally also. That work is feeding into, but it's more the actual programs on the ground that the TLAs are developing, the strategies that they're developing, the action plans that they're developing, that we can work together with them outside of that risk assessment that I'm interested in.
Right.
I might just jump in there, just to say that I have regular meetings with all the strategy, policy, climate change related staff amongst the TALAs on a regular basis. I coordinate those meetings. So that's where we keep connected around what work is being done to ensure that we're lined up. So that's been going on for the last couple of years, and we'll continue to do that.
And I think
really
also,
like
Jane,
reported on, if that's possible, exactly what's happening with each TLA. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Jane. And Jane, and also Tiara Lakes Trust have their own initiatives going as well. And as long as you're linking in with those as well, Jane Palmer, as opposed to Jane Neese. Right, I've now got a question from Councillor Thompson and then White. Councillor Thompson?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the report. My questions relate to mitigation and specifically to item 6, which is Bay of Plenty regional carbon footprint. I've just got a number of issues. Firstly, is it possible, please, for us to have this information broken down into sub-regions? First question. Okay. Secondly, at some stage, could we please have an explanation for how our work is going to be affected by emissions budgets, which are likely to come shortly? And thirdly, I might have missed it, but the engaging the consultant in this area, have we seen the actual scope of the work that consultant is to do? And one of my reasons for the sub-regional breakdown is particularly for the Western Bay to understand the transport emissions, what the budget implications may well be, and how we're actually going to be able to set KPIs in this area which are meaningful and actually monitor progress. Thank you.
Shall I take that one, Laverne?
Yes, please, Jane. Yep.
So the footprint study will essentially be an update of the 2015-16. So it will have that sub-regional breakdown as per the previous one. I'm currently working with looking at 2 consultants, ACOM and Tonkin and Taylor, in terms of getting the best price for that piece of work. And we're looking to, and essentially it will be an update of the 2015-16, but we're looking to get a bit more detail around transport emissions. That might be a kind of an additional add-on project, and also a bit more detail around primary industry emissions. And the other thing to note is that we're asking for to include in the scope whether they can provide us with the 2018-19, 2019-20, which is the COVID lockdown period, and potentially 2020-21. So if we're able to, depending on the price, but if we're able to get that a full scope across those 3 years, it will give us an interesting insight into previous pre-COVID changes from 2015-16, and then potential implications through the COVID lockdowns that we've had.
So, Jane, the issue around budgets?
We're awaiting the emissions reduction plan is due out anytime soon. So once we have that information from central government, then we will be looking at that and analysing what potential implications it might be. But at the moment, I've got no, other than the Climate Change Commission advice, I have no sense of exactly what that's going to look like. So as soon as it comes out, then we'll be taking a look at that.
Thank you.
Councillor White.
Yeah, kia ora, Laverne and Jane. Thank you for your report. I noticed under implications for Māori that, and I know this is happening, iwi management plans are highlighting climate change in the mix. And that the regional council are providing, as you put it here, useful information to support them in that endeavour. I also note that the pilot with Te Arawa that has been funded, and I'm assuming will be shared at some stage. How's that all going? How's it going from your perspective in terms of, one, the sharing of information to help iwi management plans develop, and also the pilot with Te Arawa? How's it going? Early days, I know, but...
Through you, Chair. Councillor White, the actual work with Te Arawa and the collaboration with Te Arawa around the plan has been really very, very useful and effective. It's also been taken by other groups as an example of how it can be applied. So we're finding that other iwi are interested in the way that they've approached it, and we've been able to facilitate the working together with that as well. So from that perspective, moving into this next step of the risk assessment, we will pull the findings from Te Arawa's pilot and incorporate that into the next steps.
Cool.
Thank you.
Could
Okay,
through you, Chair, could I just answer Councillor Neeza's question about the It's Time website?
Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah, I was going to come back to that.
Yes. I had a long discussion with Ange Foster around this, and the consensus from the comms team in their investigations on dealing with websites and having exposure of our website to various other websites is that the finding is that it dilutes a lot of the impact of the work that we're doing on our websites. So what they're looking at doing at this stage is adding a link as another source of information, but not making it a primary factor on our websites. So it's definitely being taken into account and is going to be included as a link, but not as a driving force on our web pages.
Could just ask, what then are we doing to engage with our community as an organisation?
Thank you, Councillor Nees. That is being addressed through the communications plan for the climate change program, and there is an action plan in the comms plan for that specific addressing to the community.
And through you, Chair, I might just add that there's the project within the action plan on the Future Fit tool, which is currently being investigated to get that kind of signed up, council signed up to that. And that's the carbon footprint tool that communities can use. So the idea for that is that will be a project that we can, the community engagement teams most likely amongst the TLAs and regional council can work together and create specific projects around that tool to help support action by community in that emissions reduction space. So that's, you know, it's not underway yet, but that's the vision for that, how that tool could be used and how that can be a real strong platform for engagement with the community going forward.
Thank you, Jane. So final question from Councillor Eady. Councillor Eady.
Kia ora, Chair. Tēnā kōrua, Jane. Kōrua ko Laverne, thank you for the report. My question is regarding our LTP process, and we had submissions during that process from tangata whenua groupings concerning climate change. And, you know, for example, my tamawhariua, and I'm just wondering how have those LTP submissions been incorporated into the plan and how we're tracking on those? Kia ora.
Jane, would you like to answer?
I think primarily the key area for engaging with tangata whenua around some of their submissions in the LTP would be through the adaptation side of work, and the funding has just been released on our website for supporting iwi-led and community-led adaptation and risk assessment responses, and the list of submitters to the LTP will be used to help in terms of circulating that notice of funding as an initial first pass for the first group of people to be funded, because they've already expressed an interest. So that's one key way that we'd be building on those submissions that are coming through. And I think there's no other specific work going on at the moment in terms of building relationships with those iwi, but it's certainly one thing that needs to be built into the programme. But again, it comes down to resources and where that sits, but that's something still to be worked through.
Okay, thank you, Jane and Laverne. Thank you for your report. Councillors, there's a recommendation on page 96 that we receive the report, moved by Councillor Nees, seconded by Councillor Rose. Any further discussion? Raise your right hand, please. If you're in favour of that report, that's a good consensus. Thank you. Motion is carried. Thank you, Laverne and Jane. Right, moving on to page 103, 9.6, which is the Environmental Code of Practice for Rivers and Drainage Maintenance Activities for 2021, the annual review. You've got 3 attachments there, page 109, 13 and 14. Welcome along to, oh yes, hi Bruce, Crab and Chris Ingle. Floor's yours. Who's speaking first?
I think that'll be me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morena, councillors. Yes, this annual report is a routine report to this committee. The attachments are quite detailed, so I won't go into that, but I'd like to highlight 3 areas that the team's working hard on. The first one being that we're trying very hard to incorporate habitat restoration and fish passage and native planting as part of our routine works. We're working in very closely with our land management team and freshwater fish scientists for advice and guidance and monitoring of some of those things. That's really positive, and my team are getting quite a lot of satisfaction out of some of those projects that they take quite a lot of personal ownership in. Hapu and iwi collaboration is another area that is increasing and improving all the time. We have river committees in place for several of the river schemes now, and we're talking very closely with iwi and hapu groups to incorporate Mātauranga Māori principles as much as we can into our works. Still a lot more to be done in that area, however. And then the other one is just working on making room for the river principles whenever we can. Over the past decade or so, we've had a very flood-rich period. So we've had frequent flood events, and in several of our major river schemes, it's showing us that the river is too confined in some places, so we're having to look closely at giving the river a bit more space. But overall, just over 1,400 works completed in that past financial year, and 19 complaints received. Whilst it would be nice to have 0 complaints, I think that's a fairly reasonable situation. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bruce. And just on your first point of incorporating fish passages into your works, as of works, you've got the perfect backdrop behind you, Bruce, with the whitebait spawning habitat that you've newly created. So congratulations on that. Stunning background. Right, questions from Councillor Nees. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Yes, there's a really interesting attachment. Thank you to your report, Bruce, which lists all of the iwi management plans that you linked into. And I was actually surprised at the dates on some of them. They're quite old, and the operational landscape has changed significantly since they've been developed. So I don't know whether it's you I should be talking to, or Namuta, or someone else, or Fiona, about how these iwi management plans work. Is that the date that they were initiated and are continually updated, or is the update initiated by iwi as and when they have the resources and prioritise that? Because it seems to me that some of the dates, if they're that old, may have limited usefulness for our, or would mean that the work that we do may not fit in with what they might want now.
Okay, Councillor Nees, if I could just ask if Katarina O'Brien could respond to that.
Katarina, good morning.
Kia ora, good morning, Councillor, and kia ora koutou, everyone. Thank you. I was just sitting in the background, but I thought I might be able to be helpful with a response to this. So good observation, Councillor Nees. We have a number of quite historical iwi and hapu management plans. What we are going through is a process of looking at reviewing them and updating them, but looking at third generation plans and how we can bring through some of the emerging issues, including climate change, NPSFM and other RMA reform topical issues, including spatial planning as well. So we have a project looking at third generation plans. We have a fund that our council has approved, and we're going to look at where that takes us. So we have a specific project on that at the moment. Kia ora.
Thank you, Katarina. Next question, Councillor Eaty.
Yeah, kia ora, Mr. Chair. I was going to mention that as well. They did seem quite old, and for the Kuhi constituency as well, which is a very large area, you'd expect to see a hell of a lot more. But also from the last report around climate change, and James mentioned that due to resources, actually going around and having these relationships built and these quality engagements with hapu is quite difficult. I'm wondering whether these things should also be tied together. And I know I've mentioned this before, but we really need to find a way when we're going out and engaging on these hapu and iwi management plans, that climate change is also a part of that conversation, so that we're not that we're taking the opportunity while we're there to have all of these conversations, because I know hapu have limited resources, have limited amount of time, they get fatigued in dealing with all of the various authorities that they have to deal with, and that we need to find a way to bring those things together. And obviously it would be through Katarina's team that we would be doing that. So I'd just like to make that suggestion. Kia ora.
Thank you, Toy. Any further questions to Bruce or Chris? If not, there's a resolution on page 103. Would somebody like to move, please? Thank you, Norm. Seconded by Te Taru White. Any further discussion? Raise your right hand if you agree with that, please. Thank you. That's a good consensus. Motion is carried. Thank you for that, Bruce. Very good indeed. Right, moving on to page 118, which is presented by Chris and Paula Chapman. Welcome along, Chris and Paula. So this is the Rivers and Drainage Operational Capital Works for 2021. Paula, oh, you're there. Welcome along. Taken as read, the report through the executive summary. If there are any highlights there, Paula, you want to include? And I've got a question for you. You may already know the answer.
Kia ora koutou, Chair and councillors.
A couple of highlights. The purpose of this report is really just to give the committee a bit of a snapshot of the overall program last year for the rivers and drainage CapEx works. It was a really significant program, near on $43 million worth of work. And just of note, about a quarter of that was associated with flood repair, about a quarter with river scheme maintenance and annual flood damage. And it was indicative, as you might remember, about with the climate resilience projects that were brought forward partly into last financial year. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paula. So just, you said a quarter river repair, quarter maintenance, a quarter resilience, and the other quarter was?
Just other capital works.
Oh, right. So just a question from me, Paula, in terms of the 42 million, how much has come from the Crown for that 42 million through all those different programs, be it Jobs for Nature, Shovel Ready and that sort of thing? This is a big ticket item for us. And
it is. For this program, in terms of the climate resilience program works that were funded by government, the revenue received was about $8 million last financial year.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there was revenue that offset the flood repair work. So I think for the last financial year, it was around about $1.5 million. And there was obviously money recovered in previous years.
So was that insurance money?
That partly insurance, partly central government. It depends on, they've got different criteria.
Yep. Cool. So of the 42, about 10 is Crown funding. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Yep. Thank you. Any further questions to Paula? Oh, Jane, Councillor Nees, you've got a question, and then Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you. This is a really stupid question, but on the previous report, we had a KPI, annual plan KPI of 90% delivery, and yet we seem to be very pleased with 74% in this report. Can you explain that to me? I'm just a bit concerned because, we target rate a lot of this work. So ratepayers have paid for it, and I know we carry forward, etc. But is 74% really a good result? And if so, why?
The 74% is, I think it is reflective of a number of things. One of the main things is a lot of the projects that we have in the program are multi-year projects. So they're not only are they multi-year, but they're multifaceted. So it doesn't take much for a project, either it comes into winter and they miss doing something, so it gets shifted 3 months, and then therefore it gets shifted into another financial year. Or one part of the facet of the program might be delayed, whether it's a consent or a report or whatever, and it might shift it by a month or two, which again might shift it into a financial year. So for those projects that are multi-year ones, I think it's really tricky to say, yes, you budgeted this much in this financial year, so that's how much you should spend in that financial year. I think it's more important that you look at those projects across the scope of those years when they get to the end. This was a really ambitious program, and as I mentioned at the beginning, there was those projects that were climate resilience funded that we brought forward, and that was really to meet the shovel-ready requirement of the government. So again, perhaps a little bit ambitious, but mostly those are also multi-year projects.
Yep. Councillor Thompson and then Von Daddleston. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question under the Kaituna catchment projects, and it relates to the work that's going on in regards to assessing capacity. Is that work having regard to all of the smart growth priority development areas that are underway that are going to significantly enhance development across the Western Bay and into this catchment?
I don't know too much about the exact detail of each report, but I do know that the engineering team is working with the other local authorities on this type of work. So they're working with them and their plans for those areas. Perhaps, Chris, did you want to add to that?
Well, I can confirm that the engineering team are well aware of a lot of the potential developments that are occurring in that catchment. So I'm pretty sure that the modelling will have taken those developments into account, yes.
Thank you, Chris. And through you, Chair, could we please have a follow-up on that, just so that we are, satisfied that there is a very good nexus between this work and the work that's currently proposed over a period of some time in that Western Bay area. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Paula. Yep, Sarah's nodding, so it shall be done. Councillor Von Danielson.
Thank you. Just a general query. Under 2.2, all the key projects, if I go through them all, there seems to be substantial underspend overall on what was budgeted for this financial year versus what was actually spent, and recognising that it was a $42 million program, it just looks to me like, and I recognise these are multi-year projects, but can you give me a bit of an explanation? If we spent 42, what were we budgeting at the start of the year to spend, that we had all this underspend everywhere?
Just to clarify, the total budget at the beginning of the year was 42. If in relation to point 2.2.1, is that?
Well, that's one of them. Yeah.
Okay. For that particular project, the flood repair project, and it's in the last, we're just coming to the end of that project. The underspend there is a saving. So it's not an underspend because work hasn't been done. In that situation, the way the program has rolled out, all of the very low priority sites have been sort of carried on to the end, and then having re-inspected that work at the end, the decision was made for a number of sites that there was, in fact, they'd self-healed and the work wasn't required. So those, in that instance, that was a saving, not an underspend. I think I've mentioned previously about some of the other multi-year projects like the Rangataiki Floodway, Rangataiki Floodwalls, etc. Yes, there's been an underspend, but that will be carried forward into this financial year and the work will still continue.
Yeah, it just looks to me like it makes for very inaccurate planning to be so far out in the spend versus actual, and the budgeted spend versus actual. It's a alert to me, that's all.
Can I draw your attention, councillors, to 254? This is a good example on page 126. This is a Waiaweka estuary restoration project that we came up with during lockdown last year in Easter weekend. That's a $4 million project, which was basically not spent at all. And it was a shovel-ready project, which turned out to be perhaps not as shovel-ready as we'd hoped it would be. And it revolves around some land purchase. So, it's that sort of thing, which is a large item in the budget, which has not been spent. But it was always a long shot, I'd have to say, to be able to achieve that project last financial year, and even this financial year, I'd have to say, is that we're not close to resolving the negotiation on that one. So those sort of big ticket items do skew the results if you're looking at percentage-wise achievement. I was encouraged actually with this last financial year because the maintenance budget was almost 100% spent. So the work that Bruce Crabb's team is doing was achieved. There are a few capital items that have had significant slippage. So that's just the space we're in, councillors.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And those of us who were on the Rivers and Drainage Bylaw review will know this piece of land at Waiaweka very well, because I think we walked over it. Okay, no further questions. Right, I'd like to, so on page 118, we're just receiving the report. Would somebody like to move, please? Councillor Von Dadelson, seconded by Chairman Leader. Please raise your right hand. Good consensus. Thank you very much for that. Motion is carried on page 118. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paula, for those explanations. Keep up the good work, because you've got 22 million to spend this year, and report back next year how you're going with that. So keep up the good work. It's our core business and we're dependent on you. Right, councillors and members of the public, we're going to move into a publicly excluded session now. So would somebody like to move? We go into publicly excluded. Oh, I've lost all my people. Stacey and Councillor Thurston, I think you were moved into publicly excluded. All those in favour?